Once pre-arranged introductions had been made, the catalyst for Lennon and McCartney's intense friendship was born of a shared tragedy. Both lost their mothers at an early age. It affected John deeply for all his life. Ostensibly, McCartney coped better than Lennon, though I'm not so sure he did cope better than John. Perhaps Paul buried the pain better, as a result of him still having his father and siblings living with him after he lost his mother Mary. By contrast, John was emotionally lost after the dreadful road accident that killed his mother Julia. Despite the anger, violence and bravado he used as a defense mechanism, John was literally screaming out for help when he was down throughout his lyrical career. His incipient anger and spiky personality was exacerbated by the loss of his mother Julia after having recently rekindled a relationship with her. In fact, as John said himself, he felt he'd lost his mother twice. The first time was when he was only 5 years old and living at 9 Newcastle Road, Wavertree, the house he'd lived at since being born at Liverpool's main maternity hospital on the evening of 9th of October 1940. John's merchant navy father Alf, sometimes known as Freddie, was away on a ship and missed John's birth. Alf has received a lot of criticism over the decades for the way he seemingly abandoned John, and on the surface, without a lot of real evidence, that criticism could be justified, and certainly John felt that way towards his father. Though John wasn't always given the full facts, as we'll discover later, and there does seem to be another perspective on why Alf was absent. Julia's family despised Alf because they thought he wouldn't work to provide for Julia and their new son John. Julia's sister, John's Aunt Mimi, was particularly opposed to Alf, and Julia's father demanded that Alf present something tangible to clearly illustrate he could financially support Julia. Remember, this was during the Second World War, when well-paid work was hard to find in those days. Alf's only available solution was to sign on as a merchant navy bellboy on a ship bound for the Mediterranean, though this meant he would have to be away at sea for much of John's early life. As time progressed, Alf graduated from bellboy to steward during the many months he was away. Initially, he sent money every month to Julia to financially support her. Once, whilst on shore leave in Liverpool, Alf even auditioned for theatre manager roles but had no success, and had little choice but to go back to sea. 9 Newcastle Road, Wavertree wasn't just John's first home. It was literally where his life began. He was conceived there during January 1940, when Alf was on a week's shore leave from the Duchess of York Merchant Navy ship. Incidentally, in 2013, the house on Newcastle Road was bought at auction for £480,000 by a very wealthy anonymous buyer that described herself as a John Lennon and Beatles superfan. That £480,000 sum was over 3 times the asking price. Clearly, the house meant something very important to the mystery buyer living in America. Though she's not stated it publicly, even during her visits to the property shortly afterwards with her son Sean, it's widely known and accepted the anonymous purchaser was in fact Yoko Ono. Years after he finally lost his mother in a road accident, John said he felt he'd lost his mother Julia twice, because he lost her initially when he was only 5 years old at Newcastle Road. One time, whilst on shore leave, Alf took the infant John to Blackpool, ostensibly for a day out. However, being suspicious, John's mother Julia confronted Alf in Blackpool because she believed he was planning on taking the 5-year-old John to live in New Zealand with him. A row erupted, with Alf demanding the 5-year-old John choose right now who he wanted to be with. When the event is presented like that, it's hard to fathom what sort of person would force a distressed 5-year-old to choose between his mother and father in this way. Surely Alf must have realised the lifelong emotional damage he was forcing on his terrified son. However, it's possible Alf was emotionally damaged too, after being brought up in an orphanage after he was too abandoned as a young child. It's reported the distraught John twice chose his father, but subsequently broke down in tears and ran after his mother. The distress caused to John was too much for Julia's sister Mimi to tolerate, and as a result, with other factors, Mimi made steps to gain full guardianship of John. Julia very reluctantly agreed to let her sister Mimi look after 5-year-old John, because her own lifestyle and mental health precluded her from being able to give him what he needed. Looking back on his life a few years before he was murdered, John said, "I lost my mother twice, once as a child of 5, and then again at 17. It made me very, very bitter inside. I had just begun to establish a relationship with her when she was killed. We'd caught up on so much in just a few short years. We could communicate. We got on." The early rain that fell on John's life caused him sustained pain for all of his 40 years. Even though he did experience highs throughout his tragically cut short life, emotional pain never left him. John's mother Julia had 2 other children after having John. The eldest was also named Julia, and the youngest was called Jackie. John's younger half-sister Julia later spoke about the shared intense pain they all felt after their mother was killed by a policeman in a road accident. Young Julia said, "John was 17, I was 11, and Jackie was 8 years old. All 3 of us were devastated. The impact on our lives is endless. It went on for John until he died, and for me and Jackie, it still continues." Lennon's songs such as Mother, Julia, and My Mummy's Dead clearly illustrate the raw pain that never left John. John's rawly recorded songs My Mummy's Dead, committed to tape at John and Yoko's rented home at 841 Neames Road, Bel Air, California, and Mother are notable because they not only feature John crying for his lost mother, it's the only time we hear him shrieking, "Daddy, come home," to the father he frequently said he despised. These songs weren't the first time John exposed his pain. Long before solo John exposed his raw pain to the world on My Mummy's Dead and Mother, the never-ending emotional pain he suffered was lyrically evident in upbeat Beatles songs such as Help. In fact, Lennon had originally wanted Help to be recorded as a ballad, or at least at a much slower, more melancholic tempo, but he was pressured into making it up-tempo so it could be a single. Intriguingly, though long accepted to be a sole Lennon composition, probably because we only hear his singing voice on the recording, McCartney does claim to have helped John write Help. Was that Paul again aligning his emotional trauma with John? Years later, when she had become a special needs teacher just outside of Chester, John's younger half-sister Julia wrote about the pain they all felt in her book. "Imagine this, growing up with my brother John Lennon." She said, "Having my mother, loving her so deeply and then losing her, has given me my most intense happiness and my most bereft sadness. Like any child who has lost a beloved parent while still very young, the happiness and sadness of her memory are inextricably linked. When I had her, I wasn't aware that things could change. Like any child, I was simply living life, as I had always known it. You don't know that life can be snuffed out in the blink of an eye until it happens. I was 11 years old when my world turned inside out, when my mother, after whom I was named, was killed when she was hit by a car on a July evening in 1958. As a teenager, John was close to his younger half-sisters Julia and Jackie. After the Beatles broke up and John was living in America, there was a period of time, quite a prolonged period of time, that John phoned Julia every week. Julia said John only ever wanted to talk about their mother. There was also other deep sadness in their lives. John, Julia and Jackie had another younger sister that had been reluctantly given up for adoption by John's mother Julia. John was unaware of this other half-sister. As I said before, John wasn't always made aware of all the facts about different and important aspects about his life. John was unaware of this other half-sister because he was murdered before the facts came to light. I'll finish up this Musical Steps episode with information about the adopted younger sister John was unaware about.